A millionaire pays a homeless woman to have a child. But when the child was born, he was shocked. Before we begin the story, comment below with the city you're watching from. Alexander Carter was a titan of industry, his name synonymous with cold, unyielding success. He commanded boardrooms with the same precision he ordered his custom-built suits. Yet, in the silent expanse of his penthouse, surrounded by minimalist art and panoramic city views, he felt a void. His meticulously planned life lacked a successor, an heir to the empire he'd forged. 2 failed engagements had cemented his belief that emotional attachments were liabilities, messy complications to be avoided. A child, however, was a strategic necessity, a biological extension of his will. He sought a purely contractual arrangement, devoid of the sentimental theatrics that had plagued his past. Control, he mused, was the only true currency. He just needed to find the right candidate. The following afternoon, Alexander's sleek electric vehicle glided through the bustling city, his mind already 3 steps ahead, calculating market shifts. A flash of vibrant color on a grimy alley wall snagged his attention. A young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, was meticulously spray-painting a sprawling mural, a riot of neon hues against the faded brick. Her clothes were paint-splattered and worn, her fiery hair a defiant cascade. Her movements were fluid, engrossed, as if the cacophony of the city simply dissolved around her artistic focus. Who paints on a public wall with such abandon? He wondered, a flicker of something he couldn't name sparking within him. He drove past, then, uncharacteristically, braked sharply. Annoyed by his own indecision, he reversed, pulling up near the alley. He rolled down the tinted window. "Hey, you, come over here." His voice was low, accustomed to immediate obedience. The artist paused, her arm still mid-stroke, a streak of electric blue on her cheek. She turned, her eyes sharp with suspicion, taking in the expensive car and the man within. She hesitated, her stance wary. "I don't have all day," Alexander stated, his tone unwavering. Slowly, reluctantly, she approached. Up close, her thin frame and tired eyes were more apparent, but a fierce independence radiated from her, almost a challenge. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy but firm. Alexander studied her. "Get in. We're going somewhere we can talk." She laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. "I'm not that kind of girl, if that's what you're implying." He frowned, irritated. "Don't be absurd. I have no time for such trivialities. I merely wish to discuss a proposition. Get in, or you can continue to pollute public property with your art." The hesitation was palpable, but something in his cold, absolute authority left her little choice. She opened the door and slid in. The silence was thick, but Alexander seemed unfazed. He drove to a secluded, upscale gallery cafe, parking discreetly. "Your name?" he asked, once they were seated at a remote table. "Mia Reed." "Why does it matter?" she retorted, her eyes still narrowed. "Because I need to know who I'm dealing with. Tell me, Mia, why do you spend your days painting walls as if nothing else exists?" She shrugged, avoiding his intense gaze. "What else is there? I lost everything. But that's none of your concern." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the pristine white table. "Right. I'll be direct. I have an offer that could fundamentally alter your existence." Her eyes narrowed further. "And what would that be?" "I want you to bear a child for me." Mia blinked, as if processing a foreign language. "You're joking, right?" "No. It's a serious proposal. All your expenses, full support throughout the pregnancy. And upon completion, a sum that will ensure you never again concern yourself with financial hardship." She let out a short, incredulous laugh, crossing her arms. "This is a joke. What kind of man makes such an offer to a complete stranger? The kind of man who understands efficiency and doesn't waste time on sentiment. I seek no relationship, Mia. No emotional entanglements. Merely a child. A continuation of my lineage. Simple as that." Mia stared at Alexander, a million thoughts warring in her mind. His words, stark and logical, hammered against her sense of self, leaving her caught between outrage and the brutal reality of her life. "This is madness," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. No woman in her right mind would agree to something like this. Alexander held her gaze, a calculated stillness about him. "No woman in your position would refuse. I offer an exit, comfort, security, a new beginning. In exchange for a biological function you already possess." She tightened her arms around herself, a futile attempt to maintain some semblance of defiance. Deep down, she knew he was right. Every day was a fight for survival. Yet, the thought of commodifying something so profoundly personal churned her stomach. "And then what?" she asked, her voice heavy with skepticism. "What happens after the baby is born?" Alexander relaxed slightly, as if this was the logical progression of the negotiation. "After the birth, you'll receive a substantial payment to restart your life. No further obligations. You'll be free to pursue whatever you wish. No strings attached? She let out a humorless chuckle. And how do I know you won't change your mind? Drag me into court later? He studied her. Mia, I am a businessman. I enter no agreement without ensuring mutual benefit. You will have a legally binding contract. Neither of us will be able to alter the terms afterward. Mia fell silent, the weight of his words settling on her. The promise of security, even temporary, was undeniably tempting. She had nothing now, not even a guaranteed place to sleep. But she also knew she stood on the precipice of a decision that would redefine her entire existence. What if I say no? She challenged, leaning forward slightly. Alexander offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Then you return to the streets. To the cold, the hunger, the endless struggle. The choice is yours. His words landed like a physical blow. She wanted to despise him for his bluntness, but she despised the truth in his words more. He had cornered her, and she knew it. But one question still gnawed at her. Why are you doing this? She demanded. A man like you, with all your wealth, why not adopt, or find one of those society women who flaunt their perfect children? Alexander took a deep breath, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. Because I want something unequivocally mine, an heir of my own blood, and adoption, or involving someone from my social strata, invites complications I refuse to entertain. I want control, Mia. Nothing more, nothing less. The stark honesty in his words unsettled her, forcing her to look away. She needed time. I need time to think, she said, finally, trying to reclaim some shred of agency. He nodded, as if expecting this response. You have 24 hours. After that, don't bother contacting me. He rose, dropped his contact card and walked toward the door, leaving her feeling as though she was caught in a current she might never escape. Walking aimlessly through the unfamiliar, affluent streets, Mia's thoughts raced. Alexander's offer echoed. Comfort, stability, a new life. She knew the bite of having nothing, the gnawing cold, the constant vigilance, the humiliating invisibility. She found herself on a secluded park bench, staring at the indifferent sky. Her grandmother used to say opportunities knock, and it's up to you to answer. But at what cost? Bearing a child, even under contract, felt monumental. Yet, what if it was her only escape from this endless loop of despair? Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his vast living room, reviewing the ironclad contract his lawyers had prepared. He detested waiting, but he knew Mia's options were limited. If she declined, he'd move on. Simple. The discreet chime of the intercom broke his concentration. His assistant, Marcus, informed him that Mia had arrived. Send her up, he replied, his voice devoid of anticipation. Minutes later, the door to his penthouse opened, and Mia entered, her eyes weary but resolute. I accept, she stated, before Alexander could speak. He stood, observing her closely. There was no hesitation in her expression, only a firm, grim decision. Excellent. Marcus, make this official. He gestured for her to sit as he retrieved the contract from the glass table. Mia's gaze swept over the document, reading the terms. The conditions were stark. Comprehensive care throughout the pregnancy, all expenses covered, and a significant sum upon delivery. In return, she would relinquish all parental rights. This seems final, she murmured, her voice flat. It is precisely what I desire, Alexander replied. And I trust it is what you desire now too. Mia took a deep breath. After a moment of almost imperceptible hesitation, she picked up the pen. With a swift, decisive motion, she signed her name, sealing an agreement that would irrevocably alter both their lives. The signing of the contract marked more than just a deal. It inaugurated a new, surreal phase in Mia Reed's life. That very day, she was ushered by Marcus, Alexander's impeccably dressed aide, into a sleek black car waiting at the entrance. As she watched the city shrink in the rearview mirror, the same city that had once felt so oppressive now seemed to shimmer with the faint promise of a different future. Mia remained largely silent during the drive to Alexander's estate, but Marcus attempted to break the ice. You'll find it extensive, quiet, and, critically, comfortable. His friendly tone was a stark contrast to the sterile formality of the contract she'd just signed. Mia simply nodded, still processing the bewildering speed of events. When the car finally swept through monumental wrought iron gates, Mia's eyes widened. The estate was a sprawling expanse of perfectly manicured gardens, leading to a mansion of imposing marble and glass, a structure as coldly elegant as its owner. Marcus led her inside. Mia barely had time to absorb the extravagant details. Crystal chandeliers, sweeping marble staircases, furniture that looked more like museum pieces than everyday comforts. This wasn't her world. Not really. But for now, it was her new reality. I'll show you to your suite, Marcus said with a polite smile. It's one of the primary ones. Mia followed in a daze. Inside, she was greeted by a colossal bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private terrace, and a bathroom larger than any apartment she'd ever called home. "If you require anything at all, just let me know. We're here to ensure your well-being," Marcus added, before leaving her alone. Mia sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the soft fabric. It was bizarre. Yesterday, cold pavement. Today, unimaginable luxury. Yet, despite the comfort, a heavy sense of displacement lingered. She wasn't a guest. She was a clause in a business arrangement. In the days that followed, Mia tried to adjust to the meticulously scheduled routine. Meals were served punctually, and a team of specialists conducted thorough medical examinations. As expected, Alexander maintained his distance. He was immersed in his world of finance, rarely seen around the estate except to review the progress reports Marcus provided on Mia's condition. On one of these rare occasions, they crossed paths in a wide, echoing hallway. Mia was returning from an appointment when she saw Alexander approaching, his posture as unyielding and serious as ever. "Is everything satisfactory?" he asked, his tone more obligatory than genuinely concerned. Mia hesitated. "Everything is, as expected, I suppose." He gave a curt nod, not elaborating. Yet, just before he turned to leave, he glanced back. "If you require anything," he added, his voice low, "inform Marcus. I expect you to be in optimal condition." Mia didn't know what to make of it. Was it genuine care, or simply a pragmatic concern for his investment? Either way, the brief exchange resonated in her mind. Despite being treated with what felt like regal indifference, Mia couldn't ignore the unsettling questions that began to surface within her. One silent night, she wandered onto her suite's balcony, gazing at the sprawling, moonlit gardens below. So serene, so utterly detached from the life she knew. "Am I doing the right thing?" she thought, hugging herself against the cool breeze. The concept of carrying a child only to relinquish it felt increasingly complex. Even with the contract explicitly stating her lack of rights, how would she emotionally disentangle herself? Meanwhile, Alexander observed everything from afar. He knew Mia was resilient, but he also recognized the significant emotional weight she carried. Despite his ingrained coldness, a faint flicker of curiosity stirred within him. Who was this woman who had accepted such an unusual proposition? And why couldn't he entirely shake the feeling that she was more than just a means to an end? One evening, Mia was in the vast, echoing library, idly flipping through a first-edition novel. She wasn't typically drawn to such weighty tomes, but there was a strange comfort in the hushed stillness of the room, the scent of aged paper. Alexander entered, surprising her. He seemed distracted, a thick leather-bound folder in his hand. "I didn't anticipate finding you here," he said, stopping in the middle of the room. "And I didn't anticipate you speaking to me," she retorted, a hint of sarcasm in her voice. He frowned but didn't immediately respond. Instead, he placed the folder on a nearby table and settled into a grand armchair. "Are you acclimating?" he asked, crossing his arms. "I think so," she replied, a touch of hesitation. "But it still feels unreal. Like a dream I haven't woken from." Alexander leaned forward slightly. "It is meant to feel that way. This is a contract, Mia. An agreement. I assure you, everything will proceed precisely as planned." "That's what you do, isn't it?" she said, a trace of defiance. "Plan everything. Calculate every variable. Leave no room for error." He looked at her, his gaze piercing, as if weighing whether this conversation was even worthwhile. "It is how I built everything I possess. Planning mitigates failure." Mia gave a short, dismissive laugh, shaking her head. "Sometimes failure is inevitable. You can plan every variable, but you can't control how you feel, Alexander." Her words struck him like a physical blow. He leaned back in the chair, silent. Mia noticed his reaction but didn't push. She simply closed the book and headed back to her room, leaving Alexander alone, lost in thought. Days bled into weeks, and Mia Reed began to grudgingly adjust to life within Alexander Carter's estate. While the opulence provided unparalleled comfort, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling of being an exotic bird in a gilded cage. Every priceless artifact, every meticulously arranged floral display, screamed that this was not her place. Still, she followed the routine. Frequent medical appointments, meals prepared by gourmet chefs, solitary walks through the sprawling gardens. But beneath the veneer of comfort, an emotional emptiness persisted. At night, alone in her opulent room, she'd stare at the impossibly high ceilings, thinking of the meager life she'd left behind. It wasn't much, but it had been hers. Now, everything felt beyond her control. What would it be like to nurture a life within her, only to hand it over? She tried to push these thoughts away, but they clung to her, especially in the quiet hours. While Mia wrestled with her internal conflicts, Alexander observed her from a distance. He maintained his customary reserved demeanor, yet found himself increasingly curious. Even amidst his relentless schedule of calls and meetings, his thoughts drifted to her. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but a peculiar, unexplainable curiosity. One afternoon, returning home after an exhausting day of negotiations, Alexander found Mia in the sprawling rose garden. She was seated on a stone bench, her face tilted towards the sky, a rare moment of serene vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the tough, independent image he had formed of her. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, against his usual inclination, he walked towards her. "Enjoying the gardens?" he asked, his voice firm, direct. Mia turned, startled, but quickly composed herself. "They're expansive. Certainly an improvement from alleyways." He sat beside her, maintaining a polite distance. There was something disarming about Mia's unvarnished honesty. "Are you settling?" he inquired. Mia shrugged, her gaze drifting to a vibrant rosebush. "It still feels foreign, like I'm living someone else's life." Alexander was silent for a moment before replying. "It's all part of the arrangement. I want you to have everything required for the plan to proceed without deviation." "As planned," she echoed, a hint of irony in her voice. "Do you truly live your entire life this way, Alexander? Planning every single second?" He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He was accustomed to deference, to agreement, never to challenge. "Planning ensures order," he stated firmly. "Without it, chaos ensues." Mia offered a faint, knowing smile, shaking her head. "I don't think everything can be controlled. Sometimes, things just happen, whether you want them to or not." Her words unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He stood abruptly, signaling the end of the conversation. "If you require anything, contact Marcus," he said, before heading back into the mansion. A few days later, Alexander decided to accompany Mia to one of her medical appointments. He rationalized his presence by stating he wished to personally confirm the satisfactory progression of the pregnancy. Yet, deep down, he felt a burgeoning, undeniable sense of responsibility. Mia showed no overt surprise, though an unspoken intrigue lingered in her eyes at his decision. At the clinic, the standard examinations were conducted. And then, for the first time, they heard it, the distinct, rhythmic beat of a tiny heart. Mia felt an unexpected wave of profound emotion wash over her. Her eyes welled with unshed tears, but she quickly blinked them back. Alexander, however, remained utterly still, his formidable expression unreadable. Yet, something in his gaze had subtly shifted. It was as if that simple, vital sound had pierced something within him that he hadn't known existed. "Everything appears perfect," the doctor announced, smiling. "You can begin to consider the next steps, prenatal classes, naming options." Mia nodded, but Alexander remained silent. On the drive back to the mansion, the silence in the car was different. It wasn't the usual cold, almost oppressive quiet, but something resonant, heavy with unspoken meaning. Mia finally broke it. "You don't strike me as someone who's easily surprised," she commented, a tentative attempt to lighten the atmosphere. Alexander sighed, his eyes fixed on the road. "I am not, but this." He paused, searching for the right words. "This is different." Mia glanced at him, intrigued. Alexander rarely displayed overt emotion, but now he seemed genuinely lost in thought. "Is it frightening?" she asked, almost a whisper. He turned his head slightly to look at her before replying. "No, it's profound, knowing that in a few months, a completely new being will exist, dependent on me." Mia felt a pang in her chest. She knew that, eventually, she would have to release this life, but hearing him speak with such a quiet sense of awe made her realize how deeply connected she already was. "They depend on me too," she said, trying to mask the tremor in her voice, "at least for now." Alexander nodded. "I know, and that is why I intend to ensure your well-being, not just physically, but in every capacity. That has become important to me." Mia remained silent, absorbing his words. It was the first time he had spoken so candidly, so sincerely, about their shared journey. Later that night, Mia stood on the terrace, watching the city lights glitter against the dark horizon. Alexander appeared again, his presence more hesitant than his usual confident stride. "I can't seem to stop thinking about what the doctor said today," he began, sitting beside her. "A life, a future." Mia turned to him, surprised by his openness. "It's a lot of responsibility, isn't it?" she asked. "It is more than that," Alexander said, his gaze fixed on the distant lights. "This is the first time I feel something in my life that cannot be quantified. I cannot plan who this child will become. I cannot control how they will grow." Mia felt a chill. It was incredibly rare for Alexander to admit anything was beyond his control. She realized that, like her, he was changing, albeit reluctantly. "Sometimes," she said, her voice soft, "that can be a good thing. Not knowing what comes next. It can bring things you never imagined." Alexander looked at her, truly considering her words for the first time. He seemed, in that moment, to be accepting the idea that not everything in life could be meticulously charted. In the ensuing days, the revelation of the pregnancy brought an unexpected, almost imperceptible lightness to the mansion. Marcus, ever efficient, began making adjustments to the nursery that had already been prepared, adapting it for future use. Mia watched these transformations with a bittersweet mix of emotions. The contract was clear. She was to relinquish the child. But deep down, she knew it would be infinitely harder than she had ever imagined. As preparations continued, Mia and Alexander began to sense that the rigid contract that had bound them was slowly, irrevocably transforming into something far more complicated. The unborn child was already reshaping their lives in ways neither had foreseen. The days following the revelation of the pregnancy brought a subtle yet profound shift in Mia and Alexander's dynamic. Though he remained the same methodical, reserved man, small gestures began to emerge, revealing a side of him Mia hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, after another medical appointment, Alexander insisted on escorting her to the car himself, a task he typically delegated to Marcus or another staff member. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, holding the door open for her. Mia nodded, surprised by the gesture. "Yes, I'm fine, thank you." On the drive back to the mansion, their usual silence was broken when Alexander asked, "Is there anything you require? Anything that would enhance your comfort?" Mia glanced at him, trying to discern his expression. It didn't feel like a superficial inquiry. There was a flicker of something more genuine, though she couldn't yet fully interpret it. "Nothing comes to mind at present, but thank you for asking," she replied cautiously. He nodded, returning his focus to the road, but Mia sensed a shift. Despite her reservations, Alexander seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being. Back at the mansion, Mia noticed more signs of change. One morning, she found a set of new, impossibly soft pillows and a weighted blanket in her room, accompanied by a simple note, "For improved rest." She couldn't help but smile at the gesture. It was a small act, but it held significant meaning. Later, as she sipped tea in the living room, Alexander entered and quietly settled into the armchair opposite her. He seemed more relaxed than usual, though still maintained his formidable demeanor. "Did the items in your room prove satisfactory?" he asked, his voice surprisingly direct. "Yes, they did," Mia replied, studying him. "It was thoughtful of you." "Good. I wish to ensure your comfort. That is important to me," he said, without looking away. Mia frowned slightly. As much as she appreciated the unexpected kindness, a barrier of mistrust remained. "You're changing, Alexander. Or at least, it appears that way. But I still don't understand why," she said, her gaze unwavering. He stared at her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed. "Perhaps you are correct. Perhaps I am changing. But the truth is, I am unaccustomed to caring." The words seemed to surprise him as much as they did to her. It was rare to witness Alexander admit any vulnerability, but there he was, revealing a part of himself that had always seemed hermetically sealed. That night, Mia reflected on their conversation, gazing at the starlit sky from her terrace. Alexander wasn't what she had expected. He remained an enigma, but moments like these, small fragments of his true self, seemed to slip through the cracks. And while she tried to maintain her emotional distance, something within her yearned to understand the man who had brought her into this world of gilded cages. Alexander, meanwhile, was in his cavernous office, staring at the contract that defined his arrangement with Mia. For the first time, he felt the oppressive weight of the document. He had entered this agreement with a singular, clear objective, an heir. But now, things were far from simple. He knew he was starting to care, and that realization, terrifyingly, defied all his carefully constructed logic. The next morning, Alexander joined Mia for breakfast. A rare occurrence. "There is something I wish to discuss," he said directly. Mia looked up, curious. "What is it?" He hesitated, a fleeting uncertainty in his eyes. "I understand you still harbor distrust, and I cannot fault you. I have never been adept at allowing others to approach. My past experiences taught me not to rely on anyone, not to permit anyone close enough to inflict damage. But with you, with what we are building, I am beginning to realize that perhaps I was mistaken." Mia remained silent, allowing him to continue. "We all construct our defenses, Alexander," she said softly, "but that doesn't mean we must forever remain behind them." He nodded, seeming to absorb her words. "Perhaps you are correct. But to deviate from established patterns is not simple for me." Mia offered a small, knowing smile. No one said it would be. Later that day, Alexander surprisingly suggested they take a walk in the gardens. They spoke of trivialities at first, the varieties of roses, the historical anecdotes of the estate. But soon, the conversation drifted back to the child. "Have you considered names?" he asked, catching her off guard. "No, Not yet. I assumed that would be a decision you'd prefer to make independently, she replied. I believe it would be equitable to decide together, he said. Mia was stunned. Alexander was actively seeking collaboration, a departure from his usual unilateral pronouncements. She realized he was making a conscious effort to be more open, more present, and while caution still lingered, she couldn't ignore the effort. As the sun began to set, they sat on a stone bench, watching the sky ignite with warm hues. I never imagined myself here, doing something like this, Mia murmured, almost to herself. Nor I, Alexander responded, a faint smile touching his lips. But perhaps this is precisely where we are meant to be. Mia looked at him, noticing that for the first time, Alexander seemed to be genuinely letting his guard down. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance that this wasn't merely a contract, but the nascent beginning of something profoundly larger. The morning dawned like any other. Mia felt the familiar weight of months of pregnancy with every movement, but she was determined to maintain her routine. Alexander, as usual, was in his office, buried beneath a mountain of documents. Their interactions, now more frequent, had settled into a comfortable, almost silent rhythm. But this day, something shifted. Just before lunch, Mia felt a sudden, sharp pain. It was different from any discomfort she'd experienced before. She tried to dismiss it, attributing it to typical pregnancy aches, but the intensity rapidly escalated. Alarmed, she called for Marcus, who immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. Mr. Carter needs to know immediately, Marcus said, helping Mia gently into a chair. This could be the onset of labor. Mia nodded, gasping as another wave of pain washed over her. Marcus quickly fetched Alexander, who appeared in the room within moments. Seeing Mia, his usually impassive face contorted with something rarely seen, genuine concern. Mia, what's happening? He asked, his voice taut with urgency as he strode towards her. I think it's happening, she managed, clutching her abdomen. The baby is coming. For a brief second, Alexander seemed frozen, but he quickly regained his formidable composure. He seized his phone, barking orders to his driver to prepare the car and to Marcus to gather everything necessary for the hospital. We're going now, he stated, his voice firm, yet with an underlying tremor of urgency Mia had never heard. The drive to the hospital was a blur of heightened emotions. Mia focused on breathing through the escalating pain, while Alexander, seated beside her, watched her with a mixture of intense anxiety and unwavering determination. He instinctively took her hand, a gesture that felt automatic but was imbued with profound meaning. We're almost there, he murmured, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. You'll be all right. We'll be all right. Mia couldn't respond, but a strange calm permeated her as his words grounded her. At the hospital, everything moved with rapid efficiency. A medical team was already on standby, thanks to Alexander's meticulous planning, and Mia was immediately escorted to the delivery room. He remained steadfastly by her side, refusing to leave despite the staff's gentle suggestions. I am staying, he stated firmly, his grip on Mia's hand resolute. I am not leaving. In the hours that followed, Alexander witnessed something he had never imagined. Mia's raw, undeniable strength as she brought their child into the world. Each moment felt endless, yet also charged with an intensity he had never experienced. Finally, a fragile cry pierced the air, a small, powerful sound that vibrated through the room like a wave of pure emotion. It's a boy, the doctor announced, beaming, as a tiny, squirming bundle was carefully placed on a nearby examination table. A beautiful, healthy son. Alexander felt his heart pound against his ribs. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the little form. Before he could fully process what was happening, a second cry, fainter but distinct, filled the room. And a girl. The doctor exclaimed, pointing to another tiny figure. Twins, a boy and a girl. Mia, exhausted but her eyes shining with unshed tears, looked at the two infants, being gently cleaned and swaddled. An overwhelming love coursed through her, a fierce, protective instinct. She longed to hold them, knowing the moment would be fleeting. Alexander stood frozen for a few seconds, watching the medical team. Then, as if something deep within him had finally given way, he stepped closer to Mia, took her hand, and simply said, You were extraordinary. Thank you. Silent tears streamed down Mia's face. She didn't know if they were tears of joy, relief, or a heart already beginning to ache at the impending separation. Soon after, the twins were gently placed in her arms. Mia held them carefully, feeling the fragile warmth of their small bodies. She studied every perfect detail, their tiny, closed eyelids, their miniature fingers instinctively grasping at air. It was an overwhelming love, and she knew it would be impossible to leave them without carrying a piece of them forever. Alexander remained by her side, silent but visibly moved. When he finally held the boy in his arms, his hardened expression softened in a way Mia had never witnessed. He seemed to connect with something far beyond the concept of an heir. It was life in its purest form, a bond he had never allowed himself to experience. When he held the girl, Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to etch the sensation into his memory. When he opened them, he looked at Mia, and she saw something she never expected. Genuine, profound gratitude. "They are perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Mia nodded, still holding the boy, tears now falling freely. She didn't care. That night, while Mia rested, Alexander remained by the baby's side in the hospital's observation area. He watched them sleep, feeling a cascade of emotions he didn't know how to control. For the first time, he realized these children weren't merely part of a meticulous plan or a legacy. They were his connection to something immeasurably greater, something he had never permitted himself to feel. True, unadulterated love. Marcus arrived, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. He placed it gently on a nearby table. "Mr. Carter," he asked, his voice soft, "is everything acceptable?" Alexander looked at him, clearly struggling to articulate. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he didn't have a perfectly formed answer. "I believe it is," he replied. Marcus smiled faintly and withdrew, leaving Alexander alone with his nascent thoughts and his new, unexpected reality. Meanwhile, Mia awoke in her room, a profound loneliness settling over her. As much as she wanted to embrace the happiness, she knew the contract still loomed. The babies, now the absolute center of her universe, wouldn't be hers for much longer. But then she heard footsteps, and saw Alexander walk through the door, carrying both infants. Something inside her shifted irrevocably. He looked different, as if this moment had transformed not just his relationship with the babies, but with her. He approached the bed, handed her the boy, and sat beside her, holding the girl close. "I don't know how," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the twins, "but this has changed everything." Mia nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. No matter how daunting the future would be, this moment, this unexpected miracle, was something she would never, ever forget. Months later, Alexander's mansion was imbued with a heavy, pregnant silence. Mia knew what this day meant. The weeks since the twins' birth had been a fragile tapestry woven with threads of overwhelming joy and gnawing anguish. She loved them more fiercely than she'd ever thought possible. Yet the contract remained, a stark reminder that her time here was drawing to a close. Today was the day she was meant to walk away from it all. As she meticulously packed her few belongings into a small, worn suitcase, Mia glanced at the twins' cribs, where they slept peacefully, two tiny miracles. Tears threatened to fall, but she refused to let them. She wouldn't let her last memories here be marred by weakness. She had signed the agreement, and she desperately tried to convince herself it was the right, the only, thing to do. Marcus knocked softly, then entered, his usually composed demeanor tinged with a rare worry. "Is everything prepared?" he asked quietly. Mia nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yes, thank you for everything, Marcus." The aide looked at her, hesitating before speaking. "Are you quite certain this is what you truly desire, Mia? It seems there is a nascent connection between you and Mr. Carter." Mia forced a smile, though her heart felt like a lead weight. "It's not about what I desire, Marcus. It's about what was agreed upon." Marcus didn't press further. He simply left the room, promising to inform Alexander that Mia was ready. When she descended the grand staircase with her suitcase in hand, Mia found Alexander waiting in the foyer. He stood by the imposing front door, his gaze fixed on her. There was no trace of the cold, calculating magnate she had first encountered. The Alexander standing there now seemed different, vulnerable, as if on the verge of losing something irreplaceable. "Everything's ready," Mia said, breaking the heavy silence. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step towards her, his gaze intense. "Are you truly leaving?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Mia felt a constriction in her throat, but she remained resolute. "That was the arrangement. I fulfilled my part. Now, it's time to move on." Alexander stood still for a moment, then reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke jacket. He pulled out the contract, the very document that had bound them. He held the paper between his fingers, as if it were something utterly insignificant. "This contract," he began, his voice steadier now, "should never have defined what is happening between us." Before Mia could fully register his words, Alexander slowly, deliberately, tore the paper into pieces, letting them flutter to the polished marble floor. The soft tearing sound echoed through the grand foyer like a quiet declaration. "I don't want you to go, Mia. I don't want this to end here." Mia froze, her eyes fixed on the scattered fragments of paper. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but doubt and an ingrained fear held her captive. "Alexander, you can't just tear up a contract and expect that to change everything. It's not that simple." He took another step towards her, his expression raw with emotion. "I know it's not simple. Nothing about this has been simple for me. But these past months have shown me something I never had the courage to admit. I need you, Mia. Not just because of the twins, but because you brought something into my life that I didn't even know was missing. His words struck her hard. But she shook her head, a desperate attempt to resist the sudden, intoxicating hope. And how do I know this is real? She asked, her voice trembling. How can I trust that you won't change your mind, that you won't pull away when things get difficult? What if it doesn't work out? She asked, almost in a whisper. Alexander reached for her hands, looking directly into her tear-filled eyes. Then we will try again. And again, if necessary. I will not give up on you, Mia. Never. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mia felt her doubts begin to dissipate, replaced by something stronger. A fragile, blossoming hope. She looked at Alexander, truly seeing him, realizing he was willing to relinquish his meticulously constructed control, his formidable barriers, to be with her. Finally, she nodded, allowing the tears to fall freely. Okay, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'll stay. Alexander let out a sigh of profound relief and pulled her into a tight embrace. For the first time, Mia felt a deep, unwavering certainty that this was where she was meant to be. The day was just breaking over Alexander's sprawling estate. Mia awoke to the soft, contented cooing of the twins from the adjacent nursery. There was something profoundly different about this morning. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she didn't feel the oppressive weight of uncertainty, nor the constant tension of living under the dictates of a cold contract. She had chosen to stay, and more importantly, Alexander had chosen to open his heart, allowing them to build something together. Mia quietly rose and padded into the nursery. She found the two little ones awake, softly gurgling as they wiggled in their respective cribs. She leaned over each, gently stroking their rosy cheeks, whispering words of tender affection. Before she could lose herself entirely in the moment, she heard soft footsteps behind her. It was Alexander. He stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold, a faint smile playing on his lips. His eyes, which had once conveyed only control and distant calculation, were now softer, filled with something Mia could only describe as pure, unfiltered love. Good morning, he said, stepping into the room and approaching the cribs. Good morning, Mia replied, as Alexander gently scooped the baby boy into his arms. He looked at the infant, a sparkle in his eyes. I don't think I ever imagined this moment would feel so natural, he confessed, almost to himself. Mia smiled, watching him effortlessly settle into his role as a father. There was something deeply fulfilling about witnessing him so utterly devoted to the twins. The weeks that followed were a period of joyful adjustment. Alexander, despite his initial inexperience, made a genuine effort to learn the intricacies of infant care, helping Mia whenever he could. He changed diapers, though a bit clumsily at first, gave bottles, and even attempted to sing lullabies, despite his gravely voice not being the most melodious. For Mia, this newfound dedication was irrefutable proof that he was truly changing, evolving beyond the man she'd first met. One evening, as they sat on the plush sofa, the twins sleeping soundly in their nearby cribs, Alexander turned to Mia. I've been contemplating something, he said, his expression serious but calm. What is it? She asked, her curiosity piqued. He took a deep breath before continuing. I want us to be a real family, not simply because of the twins, but because I want you by my side, forever. Mia was silent, taken aback by the sheer intensity of his words. She knew their feelings for each other had grown, but hearing that confession, so raw and direct, was something she hadn't dared to fully expect. Alexander, this is a significant step, she replied, trying to process the enormity of the moment. Are you sure? He took her hands, looking deeply into her eyes. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I understand this journey won't be without its difficulties, and I acknowledge the mistakes I made at the outset, but I want to build something profound with you. Something that is not predicated on contracts or obligations, but on genuine love. His words were utterly sincere, and Mia knew it. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, a silent affirmation. I want that too, Alexander. Let's try. A few weeks later, an intimate ceremony was held in the mansion's meticulously kept gardens. Only a select few were invited, including Marcus and other key staff members who had become an integral part of their extraordinary journey. The day was perfect. The sun shone brightly, and a gentle breeze rustled through the blossoms that adorned the makeshift altar. Mia wore a simple yet exquisitely elegant dress, while Alexander looked impeccably handsome in a tailored suit. The twins, dressed adorably in miniature outfits, were held by Marcus, who couldn't quite conceal his tears of joy. When Alexander and Mia exchanged their vows, they both spoke from the heart. Alexander promised to be the man she deserved, someone who would always stand by her, no matter the challenges. Mia, in turn, promised to trust him and to help him continue to grow into the best version of himself. At the end of the ceremony, as they stood embracing, each holding one of their beloved twins, Marcus remarked, "You make a truly beautiful family." And it was true. For the first time, Alexander, Mia, and the babies were exactly where they were meant to be. Life after the ceremony continued with its inevitable challenges, but also with an abundance of newfound joy. Alexander and Mia worked together, diligently creating a warm, loving home for the twins. They learned to navigate the unpredictable landscape of parenthood, facing sleepless nights and constant demands with a blend of exhaustion and profound happiness. One evening, as Mia was gently putting the babies to bed, Alexander appeared at the nursery door. He walked up to her, and without a word, wrapped her in a tight, comforting embrace. Mia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong heartbeat that had become so familiar, so reassuring. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he murmured softly. "Thank you," she replied, her voice muffled, "for showing me I could trust again." Months later, on a glorious sunny afternoon, Alexander and Mia were in the garden, watching the twins gurgle and kick on a soft mat on the grass. The baby's laughter, pure and infectious, filled the air, spreading an undeniable joy. Mia turned to Alexander, who was seated beside her, and saw him smiling, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Are you happy?" she asked, genuinely curious. He looked at her, then at the twins, his gaze lingering on their small, perfect forms. "I never imagined I could be this profoundly happy," he said. "You've given me more than I ever knew I required, Mia. A family, a purpose, love." Mia smiled, feeling a deep, abiding peace she hadn't known was possible. "And you've shown me that love can be built, even through the most unlikely of circumstances. Thank you for that." As they leaned in for a gentle kiss, the twins began to babble, something that sounded remarkably like Mama and Dada. Alexander and Mia laughed, overwhelmed with emotion, and instinctively moved closer to their little ones, enveloping them in all the love they had. That moment, simple and unassuming, was tangible proof. They had found something real. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was brimming with love, understanding, and hope. And that was all they needed to move forward, together.